If you enjoyed this podcast, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing to the channel. The manifestation. The strange events began with what seemed like ordinary farm disturbances. John Bell and his family first noticed peculiar sounds coming from outside their cabin walls at night. Scratching, knocking, and what sounded like rats gnawing on wood. These noises grew louder and more persistent each evening, defying every attempt to locate their source. Within weeks, the manifestations escalated beyond simple sounds. Family members reported seeing bizarre animal shapes that appeared and vanished without warning. Witnesses described creatures that looked like oversized dogs, strange birds, and other forms that seemed to shift and change before their eyes. The entity demonstrated abilities that challenged basic understanding of physical reality. William Porter, a neighbor who stayed overnight to investigate, claimed he managed to trap something invisible but solid within bed linens. According to his account, whatever he captured had measurable weight and struggled against the fabric before escaping, leaving behind a distinct sulfuric smell that lingered for hours. Yet the earliest written records from 1817 contain no mention of physical attacks on Betsy Bell, the very incidents that would later define the case. How did such dramatic details disappear from contemporary accounts, only to resurface decades later? The entity speaks. The invisible tormentor that had plagued the Bell family for months suddenly began to speak. Witnesses documented the first clear words in early 1819, when what had been only scratching sounds and whispers transformed into full conversations. The voice belonged to a woman, speaking with the local Tennessee accent and demonstrating an intelligence that stunned everyone who heard it. Family members and neighbors recorded how the entity could quote entire Bible passages, word for word. It sang hymns in perfect pitch and held theological discussions that impressed visiting ministers. Most disturbing was its ability to mimic voices with startling accuracy. The entity perfectly copied Reverend James Gunn's speaking style and repeated his sermons from churches miles away, reciting words that witnesses later confirmed as exact. The voice identified itself as Kate Batts, a neighbor who had ongoing disputes with John Bell over land deals. Kate Batts was very much alive and living nearby, making this claim particularly strange. When questioned about this identification, the real Kate Batts denied any involvement, yet the entity continued using her name and seemed to know intimate details about her grievances against Bell. How could any force, natural or otherwise, possess such detailed knowledge of events happening far from the Bell property? The question became even more pressing when the entity began making specific predictions about the family's future. The poisoning. On the morning of December 20th, 1820, John Bell Sr. failed to wake from his sleep. Family members found him in bed, breathing but completely unresponsive to their calls and physical attempts to rouse him. His condition appeared similar to a deep coma, with no obvious signs of illness or injury that might explain his sudden state. While family members searched for answers, someone discovered a small glass vial in the kitchen cupboard that none of the household recognized. The container held a dark liquid that no one could identify. When questioned about the strange bottle, the invisible entity that had tormented the Bell family for years made a shocking declaration. It claimed responsibility for poisoning John Bell, stating it had given him a dose that would kill him. To test the vial's contents, a family member placed a single drop on the tongue of the household cat. The animal immediately convulsed and died within moments, confirming the liquid's deadly nature. John Bell died later that same day, never regaining consciousness. Historical records cite this as the only death in United States history officially attributed to supernatural causes. But serious questions remain about this convenient explanation. Why would a supernatural being need poison to kill someone? Where did this physical vial come from, and why did no one investigate the death as a potential murder? The Prophecies. The Bell Witch returned in 1828, exactly as promised 7 years earlier. This time, the entity sought out John Bell Jr. for lengthy conversations that moved far beyond the violent harassment of the original haunting. Family records show these discussions lasted for weeks and covered complex topics, including the nature of existence, religious doctrine, and humanity's spiritual future. During these philosophical exchanges, the entity made a startling prediction about America's future. It described in specific detail an approaching war between the northern and southern states that would tear the nation apart. The entity spoke of brothers fighting brothers, mass casualties, and a conflict that would reshape the entire country. This prophecy occurred in 1828, when most Americans viewed their union as permanent, and tensions over slavery remained largely contained within political debates. 33 years later, the American Civil War erupted exactly as the entity had described. The conflict began in 1861 and unfolded with the devastating scope and familial division the entity had predicted decades earlier. How could any force, supernatural or otherwise, foresee such a specific political catastrophe so far in advance? The entity also promised to return again in exactly 107 years, 1935, to visit John Bell's direct descendant. The Ventriloquist Theory. The most damning evidence against the supernatural explanation comes from an unexpected source. In 1820, while the Bell Witch was still tormenting the family, a traveling officer named John H. Bell recorded local gossip in Robertson County. This man, sharing only a surname with the haunted family, documented stories about a teenage girl using ventriloquism to trick a neighbor into marriage. His account predates the elaborate ghost stories by decades. A Nashville newspaper article from 1856 named Betsy Bell directly. The paper claims she possessed remarkable ventriloquism skills that she used to convince Joshua Gardner to marry her. According to this version, Betsy had fallen in love with Joshua and created the entire haunting as an elaborate courtship scheme. The entity had promised to leave only when Joshua and Betsy married, which fits perfectly with this theory. This explanation makes logical sense. A clever teenage girl could produce mysterious voices and sounds through skilled ventriloquism. The timing of the haunting's end matches exactly when Betsy supposedly achieved her romantic goal. Yet serious questions remain about the physical evidence. How could ventriloquism alone explain moving furniture, invisible blows that left bruises, or William Porter's claim that he physically captured something with weight and substance? The return. Old Kate had promised to return in 1935, and locals waited to see if the Bell Witch would keep her word. Reports from that year described strange sounds near the old Bell farm, though nothing matching the intensity of the original events. Residents in the area continued reporting odd experiences through the decades that followed. Some claimed to hear faint talking in empty fields where the Bell House once stood. The bigger problem investigators face today involves the stories themselves. M.V. Ingram published his detailed account in 1894, calling it an authenticated history of the famous Bell Witch. This book contains the most complete version of events we have today. But Ingram wrote his account 73 years after John Bell died. He claimed to use Richard Williams Bell's earlier manuscript, but no one has ever found this original document. When researchers compare Ingram's elaborate 1894 stories with actual reports from the 1820s, they find huge differences. Early accounts describe simple voice tricks and minor disturbances. Ingram's book tells of violent physical attacks, detailed prophecies, and supernatural murder. These versions seem to describe completely different events. How did a case of possible ventriloquism grow into America's most famous ghost story?